Hi, my name is Foster Corder, and my greatest achievement would have to be Dad. I'm a cinematographer, writer, producer, and director in the entertainment business, but none of that matters compared to father. I think that's the greatest achievement that any of us can make. The name of my production company is Daughters to Feed Films. And that's because years ago, my company was called Foster's Fine and Funny Films, and Foster's Fine and Funky Films, and Foster Corder Productions. And then I was blessed to have kids. And I quickly learned and realized that I needed to be standing by the freeway with one of those signs, "We'll work for tuition," so, instead of food, because that's what it's all about. So instead of getting those checks, with the nice zeros behind them and having my ego kick in and think it was about me, I said, Daughters to Feed Films. So every time a check came in, I know what the reality was. It wasn't about me. My father was a musician, so I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. I was sort of a road baby. The band was on the road, and my mother managed the band. And I was raised in Chicago, south side of Chicago. Catholic school during the day, street gang during the night. Altar boy on the weekend. I started photography really at about 10, 11 years old, because my mother, and who is really the reason that I am who I am today, my mother worked many jobs, so I got to tell you this quick story to really, for when I started photography to make sense. My mother was the secretary at the Catholic school that we went to in Chicago, St. Cyril's, right? I have two brothers and a sister, and my mother was the secretary at the school during the daytime, and she was the janitor at night. So she would take us home after school, feed us, start us with our homework. Then she would go back to the school and mop floors and buff the floors and empty trash cans and stuff, right? So being the woman that she was, she also managed the apartment building that we lived in for the German guy Otto, who owned it. And we would put coal in the furnace and vacuum the halls and that stuff. And she got us to get our friends together, and we had paper routes in the morning before we would go to school in the morning. So she ran a newspaper branch out of the basement of the building we lived in. So she signed up with the Chicago Sun-Times, right? And they delivered like 300 newspapers at our basement. And then we would deliver newspapers at 6:30 in the morning, from 6:30 to 7:30 before we would go to school at 9 o'clock. So I ended up, the Chicago Sun-Times had a subscription thing. If you got like 10 new subscriptions, they would give you this little Kodak Instamatic or something camera that took 2 pen light batteries, and it was just, so I got so many subscriptions, I got 2 of them. So, and back then it was, remember Ruth, you and I probably, in the black community, you didn't go to the store to buy film. You used to get films. Remember, get some films for the camera. And it was so funny because as a young kid listening to adults, films, it was films. And I got these cameras, and it wasn't until I went to the drugstore and the guy behind the counter told me, "Films? Son, you want some film?" I was like, "No, I want films." So I learned what film was, and you had to load the camera. This was the old style version. So I got 2 cameras, and I started taking pictures, and it was over. I was just fascinated by the images, and go take it back and get it processed. And then they came out with Polaroid camera where you could in an instant and pull it back and see it. And so, at 9, and that led me on the life spiral, and since that time, when I was probably 10 or 12 years old, that's why I'm doing a one-man show soon, using the images of my life, because I got pictures literally of every week of my life from the time I was 12 years old. I carried a camera, I carried a 35 millimeter or Polaroid around with me until they came out with this magical, wonderful, incredible invention that has totally changed my life and everybody else, cell phone with cameras in them. I mean, to all the kids, that's standard, but that was literally, it was unbelievable. It's like going from typewriter to the computer for me. Somebody put a camera in a cell phone, and I didn't have to carry this 35 millimeter around with me. Because you gotta understand, when you're carrying around a $1,000 camera or a $2,000 camera with a $500 lens and all of that kind of stuff, and then maybe some extra lens, you're always in a position to be robbed. So, you know, I spent much of my life being concerned about where I was going because I'm carrying this camera, you know, and they like, oh, you got a Nikon, so that was, so since I was 12, I've been taking pictures. Yeah, I was 15 when I forged my birth certificate to get away from the street gang on the south side of Chicago, because, you know, again, going to Catholic school had its advantages and disadvantages, but we grew up in a very, very poor neighborhood. And the Blackstone Rangers, yes, and they later became the El Rukins and all this other insanity. And by going to St. Cyril's and my mother working so hard to put us in school and get us educated, we were the first ones in the neighborhood to have a car. My brother was the first one to get a motorcycle, and we would go to Catholic school wearing shirts and ties and starch shirts and stuff during the day, and then come back. We had all the baseball equipment for the neighborhood. My mother actually bought us bases. So we had 2 duffel bags full of bats and bases and balls and all of these kind of things. And so the kids would come to our house, and we'd go to the park or to a dirt lot or whatever and put down, stick the spikes and have bases. So, you know, it made it difficult, you know. And so, but the street gang was right in the street gang headquarters was next door to our house. So it just became easier to join the street gang than to, you know, keep fighting, because Mom would give me 35 cents to go to, or 50 cents to go to the store to get a loaf of bread. And I'd have to come back, and I'd come back and the bread would barely be in a bag because I had to fight to either get to the store or get home with the change, you know. So we just joined the street gang, my brother and I, and it became easier. And that caused a lot of different jealousies. So in order to get away from the street gang, because they had beat me up, because, you know, again, being smart has its advantages and being educated, but when you're involved with criminals, you know, you end up trying to be, you use your intelligence to be an intelligent criminal. So I sort of, I created this little group of guys that kind of reflected the television show Mission Impossible. So I had a group of kids that was one the strong man, one the smart guy, one the this, and we were a burglary ring, and we could break in any place. And just the one that was to me the greatest feat was we broke in a storefront Baptist church, right? And I later in college I did a whole photography series on storefront Baptist churches that I call Law. I think that was my guilt carrying over back from my childhood, right? But we broke in a storefront Baptist church, went into the bathroom, and tore out the entire bathroom wall. But on the other side of the bathroom wall was the grocery store. So we emptied out the entire grocery store overnight, me and these 6 kids, carrying it out, carrying all the food out in shopping carts to an apartment, an empty apartment, like 3-bedroom apartment, about 4 buildings away. And later on that morning, we almost got busted when the police finally came, because we had left a trail of Spam running down the alley. It was so funny. But then, And later on, we ended up being like the Robin Hoods of the neighborhood, you know, because we were giving away everything that could spoil, you know, the meat and milk and all that stuff to the whole neighborhood. So all the people in the neighborhood knew who had did it, you know, but they weren't saying anything because we was giving all of the food away, you know. And some corporation owned the store anyway, so it was, you know, it was like a cheap Kroger at that time or something like that, you know. And so later, it was Blackstone Rangers and Disciples, just to answer your question about the whole, why I went to Vietnam. The headquarters, the Blackstone Rangers headquarters got broken into. And me and my brother, God bless his soul, we were coming from being up all night. My mom thought we were in the bed, you know, and we would do the same thing a lot of kids, crawl out the window, sneak out the door after mom, because mom's working 4 jobs. She's dead tired. When she go to sleep, she's in a coma. So we would sneak out and we go and we learn about crap games. So we would take $10 and go to the crap house where the older members of the street gang ran the crap house. We would throw the dice over the string, you know, on the felt table and stuff. We'd end up winning $200-300. They called us the Smack'em Twins, you know. All the older guys hated us, right? The Smack'em Twins in here, man. And so we had all this money, and now we're on our way, and we would literally go to this restaurant, have breakfast, then go home, all before mom woke up, right? Well, we walk past the Blackstone Rangers Center, and someone had broken in there, and the telephone had been torn off the wall, and it was nickels and dimes and quarters all over the floor. So my brother, being the greedy bastard that he is, we got $200 in our pocket from $12. He's got to pick up these quarters and nickels and dimes. They didn't total no more than probably $10, you know, but he wanted to pick up on it. So now we continue on down to the restaurant where all the older guys are eating from being up all night at the gambling house and different stuff. We go to pay for our breakfast, and my brother pulls out all these nickels, all these dimes and quarters and stuff. Later on in the day, when they found out that the Stone Center had been broken into, they started reflecting. Oh, well, the Smack'em Twins, they was in there and they had this breakfast. They paid all this because they see the phone is torn off the wall and all this stuff. Well, the leader of the street gang, Jeff Ford, who is now, you know, I think he ended eventually in 1970, he ended up getting like, you know, 40, 50 years to life, you know, because he, besides all the murders and all the other stuff that they had been involved with, he was conspiring to be a terrorist for Muammar Gaddafi. And he was in prison already. And they recorded him and his gang, his guys in Chicago, on a conference call with one of Gaddafi's people, right? And the code that they were speaking was Pig Latin. Okay. Yes, I mean, this is documented. You know, it's in the Chicago Tribune newspaper sometimes. The FBI was tapping the line. And so they were trying to buy a rocket launcher to blow up a plane at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. So these were the guys that I grew up with, who I was trying to get away from. So this guy, when they brought us all together that night, that day rather, into the Stone Center, they also brought his brother-in-law. And they tied us all up and everything. And his brother-in-law was the first person that they beat up. And now you got to understand, it's 21 guys they call the main 21 in this room, much like this room, kind of sort of, but it was more. It was black walls, red carpet, spooky, right, and bar and different things. So his brother-in-law was the first guy they beat up. They knocked out every tooth in his mouth. I knew we were in trouble. Okay, so they got my brother tied up. Now you gotta understand, we're hog tied. My hands are tied behind my back, my feet are tied, and my hands are tied to my feet. And we were there for about 5 hours total, and it was just terrifying. You know, I think I had more stress from that. That's the reason I went to Vietnam. I had more post-traumatic stress from that than I did actually 13 months in Vietnam. You know, Vietnam was a piece of cake compared to that, you know. And so they beat me, they beat my brother, and then besides his brother-in-law, I was the next like biggest, because my brother was 2 years older than me, but I was larger. He was a real small guy, you know. So I guess you say small, shit, you're a munchkin. How could he be much smaller than you, right? But yeah. So anyway, they kept me there after they let everybody else go, and I never forget Jeff Ford getting in my face and saying, you know, little N-word, you know, I was good to you, you know, I should kill you. And so they were gonna throw me in the lagoon, which in Chicago, the lagoon, kids drown, at least 2 kids drown every year in Chicago from trying to swim in the lagoon. So imagine getting thrown in the lagoon, tied up. I knew I had no choice. I mean, no chance at all, right? So he gave me a choice: tell me the truth, and you know, and I may not kill you. So I started lying. You know, I just was like, yeah, we did it. I would have told him at that point where Jimmy Hoffa was buried. You know what I mean? Who was behind the fuzzy knoll or whatever it was, you know, shot Kennedy. I just came up. I had every answer in the book, whatever they wanted to know. So I just took the blame for it. We had nothing to do with it. Well, now the vice president is number 2 guy in the Blackstone Rangers, Edward Bay. This guy, you gotta imagine a football player, you know, muscle bound. He had been in prison and stuff many, many times. He's muscle bound. I look out this corner of my eye at the last second, and I see Edward Bay's fist flying through the air, right at me. Bam! Next thing I know, he hits me, and I did somersault off of the bar stool that they had me sitting on. Boom, over to the floor. And then all these guys start kicking me, man. And eventually, like, they kicked me around the room for probably 3, 4, 5 minutes. And they picked me back up. I'm bleeding like a hog now, right? He had taken it was this shotgun, but it was a police type, riot type shotgun. It was nickel plated. There's 2 barrels, and then 2 barrels turned into 1 barrel at the end. It was about that big. I remember coming down on me. He hit me 3 times in the top of my head, and that's when I passed out again. And I woke up, and they were throwing water and stuff on me and waking me up. They took me and sat me on top of the bar stool again. And I'm bleeding like Jesus at this point. Blood's just running down my face, right? And they took some old pants. It was an old pair of khakis that were oily and stuff, and put them in the sink and got water and put them on top of my head to try to stop the blood. And so he told me that he said he was gonna kill me, but it was too many witnesses. So he was gonna let me go, but he said, I'm gonna get you, right? And I knew he was, because this is the Blackstone Rangers, you know, this was before drive-by, and like they do in California and all of this stuff with the Uzis and stuff. This is like, they kicked your butt, they boxed, you know. And so I tried to walk home when they let me go, and I knew I was in trouble, and I passed out from the loss of blood. I woke up in the hospital, and everybody told me basically what's happened, and the police was asking me, and I wasn't answering any questions. And basically I got out the hospital, I saw all of this coming. So I had already, because I didn't want to stay in school, so I had taken the GED. And so when I got out of the hospital, I went to the Navy recruiter, and I signed up for the Navy and left the next day. I was only out of the hospital 1 day. Stayed in St. Louis until the recruiter said it was time for me to go. And I came back, got off 1 bus downtown Chicago, got on 1 Greyhound bus at 7 o'clock, got on the 9 o'clock bus going to O'Hare Airport to go to San Diego to go to boot camp, and then Rhode Island Naval War College and different things, and then to Vietnam. So that was, but I forged my birth certificate. That was the other thing I had to see, because I had to get away from this atmosphere. I know that wasn't, you know, what I was meant to do with my life. And so I had set all this stuff up, and I didn't know they were gonna beat me up. That just came up because I had planned on leaving anyway. And so I had forged my birth certificate at 15 and went in, and eventually they busted me. The dentist, of all people, busted me. He said, "You still got baby teeth," when I was in the Navy. And so I had turned 16 by then, and my mother signed. And so they just let me stay in. I think that was some special rule. Either they didn't want to, let people know that they had let this kid join up. But because I think that 17 was the cheapest or the youngest age, that you could be in the service. I came home to Chicago. It was funny because while I was in Vietnam fighting for my life, and I ended up on riverboats. I was a navigator, like in Apocalypse Now. That's what I did with Larry Fishburne and those guys. I was on riverboats, PBRs, and then I was on a destroyer. That's how I went over and came back on a destroyer. The Chandler, DD 717 was the ship's number. Never forget that, right? And I came back, and while I was in Vietnam, my brother was sending me newspaper clippings. So all these 21 guys that had beat me when I was in that room tied up, now probably 15 of them were dead. And it reminded me of like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Remember that movie? Well, because with the newspaper clippings that my brother sent me, it just played over and over in my head, seeing each one of them get murdered, because I knew them all, from Porgy to Ned, Bruce, Edward, all of them, right? And in the newspaper, they described how they were killed. So I kept seeing these executions, like this one guy, Bruce, he was a huge dude. He must have been like 6'6".
I had a big deep voice like this. Little boy, hey, Junebug, I'm gonna do you
like that, right? Black as pitch, right? Always wore hats. In the newspaper, they said he was coming down the steps in this building, and two guys with shotguns came through the door, shotgunned him on the steps. I could see that because I knew those buildings. I knew how all of them operated. I knew all that. So to see it, and then they talked about Porgy, how he got killed in his car, and he was a race car guy. The old Dodge Chargers, like the Dukes of Hazzard. He was like one of the four in the floor, muscle car guy, right? I could see him getting murdered. They talk about the other guy, Little John, how he got cut. Somebody tried to cut his head off, with a knife. All of these, so it was St. Valentine's Day Massacres. Everybody would get mail in Vietnam. You'd be looking to see, your girlfriend's birthday card, and your mom sent you this and that and that and that. Always in my mail, it would be about newspaper clippings about who got executed from the old neighborhood, right? So I came back, and I felt safe now because most of them were dead, and my mother had moved. And so I used my GI Bill to go to Chicago Academy of Fine Arts to study photography and film. And I was the only black person in the school. It was a girl that said she was a prince from Kenya or somewhere like that, or Guyana. So she was a princess, and her dad was, sent her to study fashion. And so studying there, and the dean of the school was a racist, and she's part of the Marxist society and all this other stuff, which I had no clue about none of that stuff at the time. I was just going to study art. I wanted to learn photography. And I'll never forget when the head professors, he says, "Well, Corder, you're going to be here, but I'm not going to make it easy on you." And I'm saying, "Well, thank you so much, for that answer." But I got to say something, though, before that, because when I first went to the service, right, after I forged my birth certificate to go in, and I was at the Newport, at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, right? It was just next to a sub base. And I was studying navigation, right? Because I wanted to study photography as a school because I scored so high on the test, but they wanted me to stay 6 years. So I refused to stay 6 years, so I had to pick another school, and that ended up being navigation, right? So I learned how to read the stars and oceanography and the different things. But I'm this black kid from the south side of Chicago, straight out of street gangs. I got an attitude, I got a chip on my shoulder that will not wait, right? One night, so I'm flunking out, basically, you know? I'm like these white people for the most part, you know? And I'm flunking out, and I'm sitting on watch. One night, I had to like midnight to 4:30 in the morning shift at the naval base. This sergeant comes in, and I can't remember his name to save my life. He's coming back from partying out all night, right? He had been on the drunk as a skunk. This guy is like, I knew he hated me because of the way, the attitude, but I hated him. You know, I hated everybody at that time. You know, it's like, hey. So he comes back in, he's drunk, and he comes back, and he comes in, I salute, and he's like, hey, Carter. And he sits on top of the desk. And he leans over the desk and he looks at me, and I'm sitting behind the desk on the side. He sits and leans down and he says, you know, Carter, you about the stupidest I ever met. Right now, I got a baton and a gun, and the gun ain't loaded, but I got a clip in my pocket, you know. It's like, and I was like, I could hit this hick in the head and just beat him to death, and, you know, they didn't have security cameras that time, you know. And I said, I could just beat him to death. Who's gonna know? He's drunk here. And I said, really, Sarge? And he's like, yep. And so he rolls off the desk and sits in a chair right next to me, puts his feet up on the desk, and he says to me, yep, you a stupid ass. He said, cause you know what? You doing exactly what they want you to do. You flunking out. If you really wanted to piss him off, you get your together and pass some classes. And I was like, really? He's like, that's right, that would piss them all off. You don't think they watching you? Because I'm the only black in there. You know, it was like, he said, you don't think they watching you? And I was like, I hadn't even thought about it. He's like, well, it don't matter though, because you're stupid. He got up and he walked off and went to bed and went to sleep, you know? And the next day, I walk past, I look at him, he didn't remember nothing. He didn't remember, and the conversation stayed with me. And Ruth, I turned my life around. That one conversation, I graduated at the top of my class, you know, and my life ain't never been the same. I mean, he literally knocked a chip off my shoulder by him walking in drunk and telling me I was the stupidest he had ever met. Totally changed my outlook on life. You know, now, I mean, because I was angry and I wasn't hurting anybody but myself. And so after that, you know, everything changed. So fast forward, I take that. And so when I was told by this professor at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts, he was going to make it hard on me, I had the flashback of the sergeant coming in that night. And that told me, okay, I knew what I was up against, you know. And I went on and I took more classes, and I graduated to the top of my class from Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. And my first, and this is real funny, right? I'm in this class with and everybody in the school was rich because it cost a lot of money. I was using the GI Bill. I was working at the Ford Motor Company at night, doing the 3 to midnight shift, to be able to afford to study photography and film. I'm in this class, and we all just learned literally, we learned aperture and shutter speed. Most cameras now are all digital, but still with lenses, most filmmakers understand, you know, aperture close down the amount of light that comes in. But we were shooting film at that time, so now it's digital. You know, if you make a mistake, you just erase it and do it again. Back then, every mistake you made cost money. You know, every time you clicked a shutter, it cost some money. Every time you had to process film, it cost some money. So the economics of the art was totally different than it is now with the electronic stuff. So as soon as we learned, the day after we learned what shutter speed and f-stop was, right? I'm driving to school. I see a police car run off the highway down over to the lakefront. Ended up, I follow the police car. I go over, I take a picture. I take the picture and I go to the newspaper and I'm take it and tell the newspaper editor what it is that I photographed and stuff. And boom, boom. They say, okay, gives the film to this guy. They say, follow them down to the lab. They process the film, bring it back. He says, take this back up to the editor, take it up. They look at the picture, they look at the contact sheet and say, okay, kid, you just made $25. She writes me a thing, take this down to payroll, they'll give you a check. Right now, I'm late for school an hour and a half. I walk into class with all of the students. We just learned what aperture and shutter speed was the day before. I walk in, I show my check and show this picture and say, I just sold a picture to the newspaper, da-da-da-da-da, to this same racist Marxist society professor that said he's gonna make it hard on me. All the students was like, what, why, Foster, you so, he is pissed. He's so angry, and he's like, that's great. Well, you know you're late for class, and I'm gonna dock you for that. I was like, dude, I just sold a picture. I just learned how to work this camera basically yesterday, So, and everybody was so happy, but so that was the way that I saw that school was gonna be. But, and I stayed in school and just made the best of it. I know I wasn't gonna ever be good enough for my instructor, but I was good enough for me. And then I started Foster's Pet and Animal Photography on the south side of Chicago when I was in my sophomore year. And so I started making money because I couldn't afford to go to school. I had to do something and with the art form, and so I spent many years doing that and became sort of famous as the first African-American animal photographer in the country. I got a lot of press, a lot of magazines and newspapers wrote about me, and I was going with horse shows, photographing rich people's horses, doing portraits for, $1,000, $1,500. I photographed somebody's dog, and because most wealthy people, if you've got property, and if you got horses, you got dogs. If you got dogs, you got horses. Most of them, when you got a lot of property. So I would photograph the dog and I photograph the horses, and I traveled with the dog shows and the horse shows, and I'd have a booth and show my fine portraits and stuff. And then people would come to my storefront, and I just had fun, and at that time, it was Leroy Hudson and Donny Hathaway, Earth, Wind and Fire. They all came out of Chicago. Those were all from the same neighborhood. And so I went to go to Hollywood. Shaka Khan, when I worked midnight at Ford Motor Company, she was a bartender across the street. So we get off work, go over there and buy beers, and Shaka saying, I'm going to Hollywood, Foss. I'm going to sing with this. All of that stuff is like back in the day, it was like, that was the early life. No, I met Will Chamberlain after I came out here. When I got tired of Chicago because of the winters, it was like 25 below zero or something like that. When I decided to leave, my car stopped on Lakeshore Drive, and I was dating this girl, and the battery had frozen, and I was standing out on Lakeshore Drive, which is like standing on PCH in California, where like the lake is here and the highway is here, and the wind is blowing, right? So, and it's New Year's Eve, right? Never forget it, New Year's Eve, 1979, 78, 79. I'm standing there with jumper cables with these little pink gloves on from the girl that I was dating, and they wouldn't even fit, they were so small, and I'm trying to wave somebody down to give me a jump, and I finally got jumped and made it to the house, and that's why I laugh today when people say, let's get champagne, because I always say, yeah, but we got to get 2 straws, because that night, after that, we sat in the bed with a bottle of champagne and 2 straws and watched Dick Clark's, rocking New Year's Eve come in, and I said, I'm out of here. I'm getting the hell out of Chicago. I can't take this. And that's when I left to come to California. Came out here and couldn't find a job in film and photography at all. So the first job I got was a probation officer for, it was ironic, and they sent me to school to learn what a term called active listening, which I still use today. And active listening is, and I remember this instructor said, when you talk to these kids, because you know, you're dealing with kids who, he's 14 years old and he shotgunned his daddy, you know, and you have the key to the front door, you know, so you have the watch at night and you have to open the door and let them go to the bathroom. And most of these kids are bigger than I am, you know, so, and they said, and the reason I quit that job, they said, you can't hit them, you know, so I was like, shit, if he tried to take this key, I'm gonna beat him down, you know, so, but, so I got this job as a probation officer, and after that, I got, the first job in Hollywood I got was shooting porn. And that was like, but I was a cameraman, you know? I'm working in the craft, you know? And that whole porn thing was interesting because that had a whole cycle to it, you know? Right? Years later, after I had a whole career and everything, Snoop Dogg got hired by Playboy to do his series. He had a series called Buck Wild. Ken Francis, a friend, called me and took me to Playboy. And Playboy hired me to go on tour with Snoop Dogg and Busta Rhymes. It was like 3 buses from LA to New York over a period of like 12 days doing concerts on the way to New York. And they had 10 girls on one bus, and then me and my crew, I had 4 cameramen and, you know, dilating sound, all that stuff on another bus, and then Snoop was on the other bus, and Busta Rhymes just flew into different cities, right? But these girls. So I ended up, years later, I ended up being the first African-American cinematographer that Playboy ever hired to run a campaign. After that, I ran into, at Inner City Cultural Center, Alana Delaney, and she was producing for Cliff Rockmore and Rudy Ray Moore film. And I got the still photographer job on, it was the Disco Godfather, I think it was, you know, and with Rudy Ray Moore. And being a film student, a real film student, had gone to film school, I knew Rudy Ray Moore, Melvin Van Peebles, and Jamal Fanaka were the only real African-American filmmakers at the time. So I was like, wow, yeah, I can work with them. And so then later on, I met the distributor, Herb Schlossberg. He ended up taking me, because I'm outside, because, you know, Rudy Ray Moore in the Dunbar Hotel and all of this stuff. I found it, I'm like, wow, they making movies, but they are like the ghettoest people in the world, you know? It's not, you couldn't spell class if you gave them 4 letters, you know, in there, and it was just incredible. So I'm outside, right? Because I can't stand to really be in the party with these people. I'm standing next to this Jewish guy. He's smoking a cigarette. We get to talking. I don't know who the hell he is. He ends up saying, oh, you haven't met Rudy? And I'm like, no. He said, okay, come on. So he takes me back in, introduces me to Rudy with this kind of introduction. He says, Rudy, you know Foster Carter? And he said, oh, no, Herb, I do not. Yeah, in his ghetto sophistication, you know. And he says, well, I want to tell you, he is the most professional man on your crew. And Rudy looked like, what? Because, you know, Rudy considers himself Mr. Filmmaker at that point. You know, he made a couple of low-budget movies, but they had all made money. And he, truly, to me, he was a god. You know, this was a black man in America making movies. I don't give a damn if it was Humpty Dumpty. He was doing it, you know? And so he put his drink down and got up off the couch and, well, you are. Well, nice to meet you. If my distributor says that you are this, and and that kicked me and Rudy's relationship off that lasted 25 years or more until he passed, and ended up managing him. I produced a couple of more of his movies, and we went on the road. I learned how to 4-wall movies around the country and different things. During that same period, coming from Chicago, when I was in Chicago, I got turned on to racquetball, playing racquetball, 3-wall racquetball outside on the concrete. when I came to California, I got introduced to indoor racquetball with the back wall. And so I had won tournaments in Chicago, and I came out here, and by some kind of way, I ended up being the teaching pro at the Santa Monica Athletic Club, right? So this is in my mind, right, of this kid from Chicago, I was gonna be like Bill Cosby. Remember, what was it? Him and Robert Culp. I Spy. Yeah, I Spy. They were the tennis players, right? And they got them into all kinds of places. Well, Santa Monica Athletic Club, it was a lot of wealthy people. That's how I met Dick Van Patten and a whole bunch of. Me and Glenn Turman actually met at the Santa Monica Athletic Club because they were doing a photo shoot, and I ended up teaching them, and Glenn Turman and I are best of friends today behind that. But Wilt Chamberlain came in the door one day and saw me playing. And again, I've had the fortune and misfortune of being the first African American or whatever to do a lot of stuff, and so I was an anomaly on the racquetball court. There weren't no brothers playing racquetball. So Wilt and I kicked off a relationship, and we became. I taught him how to play and swing, and we became doubles partners, and we would play in all of the celebrity tournaments, doubles partners, and we were a sight to see, this little bitty dude and this giant dude running around the court. And then the opportunity for Conan came up, and I ended up doing the deal for Conan. We went to Mexico. I designed a weapon that he has in the movie. It's called a bombada stick. It's a pipe with fur around it, and it's an axe blade turned upside down on one end, and a bunch of spikes on the other end. Because when we got to Mexico City, Churubusco Studios, they said, in the script, he was going to fight Arnold, and we went to the props guy, and the guy gave him this sword, and the sword was a skinny little sword that was curved, like from Aladdin or something, and I was like, wait a minute, you can't fight Conan with that. Conan has got this big sword, and he goes up, and Arnold does that thing that he do, man. It's like, you can't go out there. So, and they said, well, we start shooting in 3 days, he's ready. So I stayed up all night in the mold shop with this guy, Pedro, somebody, another, who art director and stuff. And I came up with this thing, and I showed it to Wilt, and he loved it. And then, Richard Fleischer, the director, showed it to him. He loved it. So it was on, and so they made a couple of them, and that ended up being a weapon that Arnold and Wilt fought with, and Wilt used in the movie, and me and Grace Jones hit it off. It was a good experience, and so Wilt and I did a documentary called The Amazing Feats of Wilt Chamberlain with one of Wilt's basketball friends from Oregon, and we stayed friends for 17 years until the day he died. And actually, he was in my first movie called Yo Alien, which is the true story of where the Roswell spaceship was at 3 hours before it crashed at Roswell. So Wilt ended up doing a little cameo in that movie because we always joked that he always said people thought he was an alien because he was so big and he was so athletic and da-da-da-da. So, but that was how Wilt and I, Dolomite, and my first film stuff in Hollywood came about. Wow, well, Capitol, the Capitol, you gotta understand that, again, things now are a lot different than they used to be. People, like most kids don't really realize that MTV used to be like, and I don't, it's called racist, but again, like a lot of things in America are not with white America, they don't consider it to be racist. They don't even think about it. It's just not even in their consciousness. So it's not like a conscious, like today, in today's times, when people are racist, they're consciously racist, Like you get a good old boy, the whole thing about the Confederate flag and stuff. People who are consciously racist, I hate them Jews, I hate them blacks, them Latin, them Asian, them whatever, it's conscious. The same thing with black people today. You find a ignorant black guy, his racist is ignorance, it's by consciousness. back then, MTV you didn't have nobody black. It was eventually Michael Jackson, and then Rick James broke it. So none of the record companies had any African-American executives at all. And so prior to that, and it was a whole big thing with, it was a big cry about that in society. Well, prior to that, I had started Blackbird Films. And Blackbird Films was the first African-American owned commercial production company in America. Me and Johnny Simmons, who's a big cinematographer today, shoots a lot of TV series for Disney and other people. We started that company, and we did McDonald's, Coca-Cola, California Lotto, 3 Day Blinds, AQMD, the Air Quality Management District, their first commercial. So we broke. I had Bill Duke, Stan Latham, Kevin Hooks, Helene Head, 10 Latino, female, and African-American directors, the first company ever in the history of America to have that. And so what I did was, we went to Procter & Gamble, we were broke, pretty much. And so we made appointments, went to Procter & Gamble in New York City, sat with the vice president, and I said to him, but, you don't have any African Americans or women or Latinos directing any of your commercials, any production. He's like, I can't believe that. That's impossible. And he gets on the phone. He calls 2 or 3 of the top advertising agencies, and he's got them on the speakerphone. And he's like, John, can you tell me why? How come we don't have any African Americans directing television commercials for our company? And da-da-da-da. And he said, well, no, Bob, because, the reason is there aren't any. And 3 of them said, there aren't any. And he came back with the same answer. He was like, well, that's not true. I got 2 guys sitting in my office right now, and they got 10 directors signed to their company. It's a company in LA called Blackbird Films. I mean, after that first year, man, in profits, we must have made a couple of $100,000 a piece, Johnny and I. We were rolling and then. So then what happened was a backlash, because all of these traditional commercial production companies that hadn't ever had women, had never had anybody African American or Latino, they started hiring black directors. They were taking hours. They were offering people all kinds of incentives and stuff so that they could, and most people, the average John Q. public, have no idea what made that change. But our company actually was what was behind that, right? So after 2 years, now it's the backlash. We rocked the boat. We turned the lights on, all the roaches ran. We were the guys that all the commercial production companies hated, and the different producers at the ad agencies who had been hiring the same people over and over, they had a reason not to use us now. They could, because these people had women, they had blacks, they had Latino directors, so we can go back to the old system. So they were slowly shutting us down. It wasn't a life position for me. I enjoyed it. I didn't understand the gravity of what we were doing, really, like I do now. But it was okay. The same time, this whole thing about MTV and how the record business didn't have any African Americans involved in it, and all the video commissioners were all white girls, and all the videos were, if you went on a rock and roll video, it was all, blonde guys with tattoos and earrings, long hair, and if you went on a country western music video shoot, it was good old boys with cowboy hats and boots and, motorcycles and stuff, right? And if you went on a black video or R&B video, or rap was just coming in at the time, it was all the rock and roll guys and the good old boy guys was the crews, right? You didn't have people of color in that. So I went, NAACP, it was having a meeting that Capitol Records had agreed, out of all of the record companies, to hire someone to be head of production if they could find someone qualified. So I was like, oh, really? Well, shit, let me throw my hat in the ring, right? So I went to and applied. I got a call. Vice President was Mick Kleber. He called me in. We had a meeting. he was blown away by my background. It was like, and by having a commercial production company, I knew how to work budgets. I knew, everything. And I was a filmmaker, so I understood film. And again, there was no digital, so everything was film, so everything cost a lot of money. And I was a Vietnam vet, and he was a Marine. He had been in Vietnam as a Marine, so we bonded on several different levels. And he said, okay, I gotta interview more people, but right now I gotta tell you, you're a gold mine. You're a perfect find, and I think, you got this job. And I'm like, yeah, right, sure, I got this job, He said, I'm gonna go out of town, I'll be back, I'm going to London, I'll call you when I get back. Never heard from him, so a couple of weeks later I call back and secretary tells me, oh, I don't know, I'll leave a message for me. She calls me back and says, oh, he's still out of town. He said to tell you he didn't forget about you. Long story short, eventually I get the job. I go on to be the first head of production. Little did I know that between the hate factor and the Uncle Tom factor, because all of the white people said, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just a token black. They had to hire somebody black. All the black people from New York to LA, he Uncle Tom, he only want to work with white people. It was insane, It was like everybody was stabbing me in the back. Capital was great. I learned a lot though, man. I thank God for that. I mean, all of the Hammer videos, I produced Hammer, all the Too Legit to Quit, Addams Family, everything. Worked with BB and CC Winans, Young MC, Bust a Move, all this. Produced probably with the team, the whole Capital team, and I learned team just like I learned in Vietnam. Mick Kleber taught me about teamwork in film. But about 150 music videos, and some of the biggest stuff. Bonnie Raitt, Great White, Paul McCartney. We did great work. That was the heyday of music videos, and so and I went to the Pope is coming now. I went to Poland and shot the Pope with BB and CC, which is a funny story too, because I almost got left in Poland because we were shooting the Pope, right? BB and CC was at the concert, and we got 2 film cameras. So Peter Nigel, who's a Czechoslovakian director, he's operating one, I'm operating one. So the concert is going to be over in about 45 minutes. So I make the call, let's pack up, let's get out of here, right? So I had hired 3 Polish taxi cab drivers, and they had vans. And Peter is translating. He knew a little Polish, so we speaking English, Czech, and Polish combined. So we pack everything into the last truck, the last cab. And then you gotta imagine, there's a concert with 100,000 people in this stadium, right? Because the Pope is there, but it's the concert of the Pope, and the Pope is gonna speak tomorrow, and right? So we're at the back of this thing. And it's like, imagine like a Roman stadium kind of thing, where it's pitch black out here. All the lights are inside the stadium, and they had these giant doors. We load the film camera. I go back to the giant doors to tell the guys, thank you, So I slam the doors. I turn around to tell the guys, thanks, we got all of our equipment out, right? Because we had been rushing to get out before all these people start coming out. The taxi cab driver takes off, going down the road. Peter is in the van, and he says, no, stop, Foster, we left Foster. And the guy said, okay, and he says, no, stop, we left Foster. And the guy said, I go faster. And the truck disappears down the road, and I see the red taillights just go. Now I'm standing in the middle of Poland in the woods somewhere. I'm running after this thing, and I can hear the guy, faster, I go faster. And and I'm like, how the fuck did this happen? I have no, I probably got like $1,000 in American money and, $400 in Polish money I had for the taxi cab drivers. And I turned around and I ran 3 blocks from the stadium trying to catch this truck. And now I'm standing literally in the pitch black. And I'm thinking wolves and bears and all, whatever. And I'm like, how did this happen? I'm like, Peter, how could you let these people take off with, you know? And then slowly they come back, and I'm like, oh God, because I was walking back to the stadium, because I figured, because you know, when you overseas, and this is like 25, 30 years ago, all kinds of stuff. I'm thinking some Polish guys put guns on Peter, and they took off, they got all this equipment from America, da 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 da. So I'm walking back to the stadium, and then they finally come back, and then Peter's telling me, Father, you wouldn't believe it, I'm telling you. Peter is Czechoslovakian, so he's got an accent and speaking broken English, and then these guys are Polish. So, and we laughing our ass off. He's telling me, I would tell the guy, I told him, I said, go faster. We left faster, and he said, I go faster. And he said, he was changing. He said, we were a mile and a half away before I could, because Peter had to crawl over the equipment to get to the guy to tell him, no, stop. So it was just, it was hilarious, man. Well, today I have 2 shows on the web. We're seen in 71 countries. Foster's Animal World TV is my YouTube channel. And I have Foster's Animal World TV on Tuesday. It's a 4-hour show about all kinds of animals around the world. And I Skype people in from around the world. And we have in-studio guests and different things. And I have conversations with a pit bull, which is a show to educate people about pit bulls and change the public perception of them. Remember I said that first camera that I got? Well, the first pictures that I took were of dogs, of my dog Rex back in 1965, 67, something like that. And it all came full circle, you know. When I did Foster's pet and animal photography in Chicago, I opened a studio because I was tired of the models, you know. And, you know, when you got cameras, I used to say the only thing that gets you girls faster than a handful of money is a handful of camera. You know, it's like, it's just the nature of the profession, you know. So I was tired of women. It was, you know, I always been around women, but I was tired of women. I was tired of models showing up with excuses about why they were late. I was tired of girls talking about their boyfriends didn't want them to do this and did it. I was just tired, so I was looking for something else. And the dog thing came about, and I did the research. I talked to the only guy who was an animal photographer in the country at that time, and he lived in like Maine or Massachusetts or something, and he said it had been a wonderful profession for him and allowed him to put his kids through school and stuff. And he said, yeah, you should. So now, when I came out here to California, I started a friend of mine was the package designer in Santa Monica, the Chambers Design Group. He designed the Woolite bottle and Orban Reckenbacher's packaging for the popcorn, a couple other things, right? Wonderful guy. Ended up being my best man when I got married, you know. We became friends. Well, one of his clients was Kal Kan, and he knew about my animal photography in Chicago. So it just kind of, that's how, you know, God, Allah, Jehovah, Buddha, whoever you pray to and believe in, works. It's just a universal thing, you know. And so he gave me the job of photographing the Kal Kan dog food and cat food bags and cans. And I somehow got famous for making kids and animals work well together, you know. But it really was, don't feed the dog, use liver sausage and have a synthesizer. And between the liver sausage and the dog licking the kid and that synthesizer, the dog would strike a pose, you know. So one thing led to another, and that was my career. And now with the internet, you know, I tried to, everybody had a YouTube channel, you know, that became big. I didn't know about it 10 years ago. You know, I wasn't a techie and stuff, but I started my channel about 3 years ago because it was a way for me just to support pit bulls and animals and help, you know, because there's a organization called dogbite.org who is a bunch of insane people who just hate pit bulls, and they bought into all of the news stuff, and you know, and the news media has turned the pit bull into just public enemy number one. You know, I mean, there are probably 200 dog bites in the city today. There'll be a whole bunch of Chihuahua bites. There'll be a bunch of you know, Irish setter bites. There'll be some German Shepherd bites. You know, there'll be a lot of poodle bites. But if there's one pit bull bite, it's going to be on the news. And so the community, the world, the United States and other countries, a lot of places have just bought into the crazy Tasmanian devil of a pit bull, when it's not the dog, it is the owner. You know, a dog is just like a child. If you raise it to be crazy, if you don't put time and love into it, if you don't hug it, you're going to end up doing the perp walk. It's just a matter of time, you know. So there are such things as bad dogs. There are people that inbreed and, you know, do different things to make dogs crazy, you know. But it's not as a whole. You can't paint it as a paintbrush, you know. Like Donald Trump says, take all the Mexicans and kick them out. And some people say all black people are thieves and crooks and all of this other stuff. You know, and some people say all white people are this. Some people say all Asians are this. You know, you can't paint everybody with one brush, you know. So, and dogs are the same and pit bulls are the same. And, you know, so for me, I started to educate John Q. Public, because the biggest problem, and I'm really glad, I'm happy to speak on this subject, the biggest problem right now, the number one, if we wanted to change the world, is education of the average person about spade and neutering. You know, I can't tell you how important spade and neutering of your animals are, because that's the real problem. It's just too many damn dogs. It's just too many to shelters. I'm part of 400 different dog rescue groups around the country, around the world, right? If we can go to a shelter right now and a rescue group can take 3 dogs out of the back door and rehabilitate them and get them you know, ready for adoption, there's 10 dogs coming in the front door that people are turning in, that the animal services people are pulling off the street, stray dogs and stuff. There's too many dogs. These people are irresponsible about letting their dogs just have sex and have puppies, and people, oh, I want them to have puppies. No, stupid. They're going to end up in the shelter. You know, out of every 8 puppies, 6 of them will end up in the shelter. And the system just can't stand that load. What people don't understand is 18 million dogs being put to sleep every year in this country. I think it's because of the money. The reason that the system's not changing, we can get into that later, because it's just like homelessness. It's become such a big business that people don't really want it to change. But, you know, some people will talk about breeders. Oh, breeders are bad. We have to stop breeders. In Los Angeles alone, there's probably 1.2 million. It's like 1.2 million dogs and dog owners, right? There may be 1,000 registered breeders. The breeders are not creating. We put to sleep 4 million dogs a year. The breeders, they'd have to be having a litter every hour. It's not the breeders. It is, if you could educate 500,000 people not to let their dogs have puppies and make puppies, and have people restrain their dogs, and have people lock their gates and not have dogs on the street. Just, I mean, it's so many different issues that don't get me started. Excuse me, because like Los Angeles Animal Services budget is $48 million a year. Do you know there's probably 5% of that that's only spent with African American and Latino education, which is where it needs to be spent, you know, because people don't understand the stress that puts on the system. Just like in South Central and places, you see these dogs running around on the street loose. Well, in Santa Monica and other communities, wealthier communities, the kids go to school, they get rides to school. Mom and dad drops them off to school, or they riding their bike to school, or something, or the school bus is picking them up. In South Central, kids are walking to school. The kids get bit by the dog, either walking to school or get bit by a stray dog coming home from school. If you get chased by a dog, the amount of fleas and ticks that all of these stray dogs put in the community, and then other diseases that come from that. It's just like, it's a domino effect. There's so many different issues that go into animal education that people don't really get, I just want it to be effective in that. It's something that I said that I could do this worthwhile, it's a worthwhile thing to do for the community, for the world, because we need to be educated, And just if you're going to be a dog owner, period, I don't care what kind of dog you own, you need to be responsible. You need to understand what it is, how it is. You can't chain a dog up in the backyard, man. You can't do that. You got to socialize an animal. Now, again, African Americans and Latinos and the white community have different interpretations of how a dog fits into their life. You go, like a lot of black people say, well, white people treat dogs like people, and black people say it's a dog, but both of them are a little skewed. There's some place in the middle. It's an animal, and all animals, humans and four-legged, deserve respect and deserve to be communicated with. So it's just different issues. But animal abuse is just as prevalent as child abuse and domestic abuse and other stuff. It's people out here literally torturing animals, and that's why my series Breeder X. I don't know if you've seen it, but I got a web series called Breeder X. It's pretty much Dexter for dogs. It's about a guy him and his wife are trying to have a baby, and his wife ends up having a miscarriage, and he brings a pit bull, a puppy, home to cheer her up. And the dog is kidnapped out of their yard, and they see it on the news. It was used as a bait dog, and that sends him off, and he starts kidnapping, torturing, and sometimes murdering people who've escaped the criminal justice system for animal abuse, dog fighting, and other crimes against animals. So he captures them, keeps them locked up in a cage. They have to live like dogs, eat like dogs, and different things. And so we've got 2 episodes released so far. But hopefully we'll sell it as a TV series. But